Alright, so in this lecture video, we're going to be covering the different forms of selection. More specifically, I'll be covering the different forms or types of natural selection, balancing selection, and sexual selection. Alrighty, so let's get started. With natural selection, there's kind of three different ways in which it can operate. When I say operate, I'm referring to how it can shift allele frequencies in one way or the other over evolutionary time. So it can do that in one of three ways. Those ways are directional selection, diversifying selection, and stabilizing selection. Stabilizing selection occurs when the intermediate phenotype, or kind of the average trait value, is favored over either extreme. So you have the preference or selection for an average or intermediate phenotype, selection against either extremes. So selection against phenotypes that are occurring at these extreme ends. This usually occurs when that intermediate phenotype is the per se optimal phenotype for that environment or that moment in time. So this could be a selection for an optimal number of fingers, or optimal body size. It could be selection for the optimal number of offspring. Again, it's selecting for that optimum, and that optimum is that intermediate phenotype. So it's great for that purpose, but there are issues that can arise from stabilizing selection. Because you're selecting solely for this kind of intermediate phenotype or this optimal phenotype, genetic diversity is reduced at the loci for these extremes, meaning you're decreasing, or stabilizing selection can lead to a decrease in genetic diversity by removing those extreme phenotypes from the population. So example, with stabilizing selection, you have clutch size in your American robins. You see them often at spring. Robins typically lay 4 eggs. That's their happy medium for clutch size. Clutch size meaning the number of offspring they yield. When they have larger clutch sizes, there's a higher competition for food from mom, which can result in malnourished chicks. So it's detrimental to the health of her offspring to have more than 4 eggs. But it's also detrimental to have less than 4, because by having a smaller yield or smaller clutch size, there is risk that none of the offspring will survive. In that case, there would be no viable offspring. So in this case, stabilizing selection is selecting for the optimal clutch size, which is 4. Then there's disruptive selection, which is completely on the opposite side, or counter to stabilizing selection. Disruptive selection occurs when conditions in a habitat favor individuals that are kind of on the extremes of the phenotypic range, rather than individuals with the intermediate phenotypic trait. So again, you have, instead of selection occurring at that average trait or intermediate phenotype, it's selecting or occurring at your extreme ends. You're selecting against the intermediate phenotype. This will often happen when there is some sort of change in the environment. Disruptive selection will operate in an effort to kind of counter those changes by favoring those extreme traits. There's a possibility, or kind of the intent of the operation is to help organisms survive those new conditions. Right, you're selecting for areas that have that high genetic diversity, and it's likely that those individuals will have some sort of trait or characteristic that make them able to better survive or deal with those changes that are now no longer ideal for your optimal phenotype, which is that intermediate. So that's why you have selection for your extreme phenotypes under this type of selection. Now with this kind of mode of selection, it often will lead to the development of two distinct populations that will become separated from one another. So it can lead to speciation. It can create subspecies. This is, again, where you actually do see some speciation events starting to arise. And it all arises from this attempt to deal with some sort of change in the environment. You kind of get this bimodal distribution representative of your two extreme phenotypes. So a great example of this is with the black-bellied seedcracker. This is a species of bird found in Cameroon that exhibits non-sex related polymorphism in beak size. So what this means is that this bird species has several types of morphs, or you can kind of think of them as subsets of that species, which vary from one another according to beak size. That allows them to utilize different trophic niches, which is important for survival. So they essentially have multiple niche polymorphism. You have multiple morphs that vary from one another, and they're able to, because of those variations with this bird in beak size, they're able to occupy different niches. So this bird feeds on sedge seeds, and those sedge seeds come from two different sedge species. One of the species has soft seeds, the other has hard seeds. So because of those kind of specific variations in seed size, or what seeds are available as a food resource, you get a bimodal distribution in beak size of the seed crackers, where there's the individuals either have small beak or a large beak. Right? The small beaks are more efficient at utilizing or allowing consumption of the soft seeds, whereas the larger bills can break down and crack open those hard seeds. Individuals with kind of the intermediate sizes, so your kind of the average traits per se, they cannot use their beak to really access either kind of seed, either one, efficiently enough that they can survive or sustain their longevity. And because of that, they survive poorly, and you see a decrease in the number of individuals that have intermediate beak sizes. So again, you get this bimodal distribution where you have selection for individuals at the extremes of those phenotypic spectrums, individuals having either short beaks or long beaks. All right, directional selection. So this is the third kind of form of natural selection, or third type of natural selection. This occurs when a single extreme phenotype is favored over any other phenotype. And it will actually cause a shift in allele frequencies in the direction of that phenotype. So what happens is the movement of allelic frequencies will move towards the phenotype that has a higher fitness associated with it. And that will produce a modified adapted population that shifts away from the average trait or condition. An example of this is body size in horses. So ancestrally, the ancestor for modern horses is Heterozygote. This was a very, very small species. It was more of a forest-dwelling species that was only about the size of a dog, so very small body size. Now, over years of evolution, there was a change in environmental condition and structure, where there was a shift from forest habitats into grassland regions. So in order to kind of follow that shift or that environmental change, your ancestral horse species actually had to go through a series of successive changes in order to better survive in those conditions. And in this case, it involved a series of changes in body size and actual kind of body structure changes and distribution. And over time, that's how we got to your modern day horse. The ancestral horses would increase body size because that's favored for grassland habitats. By having a larger body size, or the body size that we see in modern horse species, it enables them to run farther and faster because they have longer legs, they have larger muscles, and they also have a greater lung capacity. So your ancestral species modified in the direction of the extreme phenotype, which was larger body size, in an effort to deal with environmental conditions that favored this extreme phenotype. Another example is with the heavy-footed moa, which is now extinct species, but it's looking at the bones of the species, it's actually a fantastic example of directional selection. So within any species, there's going to be some sort of variation in body size. Typically, body size is somewhat correlated to climate, right? Larger individuals usually are in kind of colder environments, and smaller individuals are found in warmer regions. And the reason for that is larger individuals have a smaller surface area to volume ratio. So that enables them to retain heat more efficiently, which as a result allows them to be more fit in cold climates. So it increases their fitness in cold climates. On the alternative aspect, with your smaller body size or your smaller species, they have a higher surface area to volume ratio, which means they're able to lose heat more efficiently in warmer regions. So that makes them more fit for warmer climates, or better able to survive in warmer climates. That relationship between body size and climate is known as Bergmann's rule. Bergmann's rule is kind of this ecogeographical rule that states this typical distribution of species where you have larger body size in colder climates and smaller body size in warmer regions. Now, if we look at kind of the body mass and size of the heavy-footed moa living during this period or this ice age in New Zealand, their bones were much larger, so they had a much larger body size on average than individuals from, say, the last 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. And that was when New Zealand's climate was becoming relatively warmer. So during that cold period, when there was a cold climate, you had an increase in body size because that was favored. Cold climate selected for larger individuals because they were more fit to survive, in colder climates. Whereas once that climate started to warm, you had a shift in the opposite direction towards smaller bodied individuals because warmer climates select for smaller individuals. Those are both directional selections. The movement of phenotype basically in one direction or the other based on what phenotype is favored. These are just some summary slides for my students. I always like giving summary slides, kind of put everything in a nice wrapped box with a pretty pink bow. All right, so moving on to different types of selection that are not necessarily rooted in natural selection per se. We come to the concept of sexual selection. Oh, hello, Figaro. Sexual selection was Darwin's kind of second great insight, and he defined sexual selection as kind of depending on or being rooted in the advantage of one individual or certain individuals over others of the same species or same sex in respect to reproduction. In other words, it was dependent on one individual's ability to have a higher reproductive success based on the other individuals of that species. Essentially, sexual selection is interspecific reproductive competition. Interspecific meaning between same individuals of the same species. So kind of internal conflict. Now this will arise from differences in mating success, where individuals of one sex have preference for certain characteristics in individuals of the other sex. So it occurs when certain traits increase mating success. And there has been some discussion in the past as whether distinguishing between sexual selection and natural selection is even if there's any worth to that discussion. And there is. They are two separate entities, and Darwin made that distinction extremely clear, especially with his example. Kind of according to him, sexual selection depends not on the struggle for existence, but rather on the struggle for mates and between mates, right? So it's the struggle for reproduction. And the reason why that distinction is so important, why it's so important to kind of acknowledge that sexual selection is, again, the struggle for mates or the struggle for reproduction, is that can be used to explain why certain traits or characteristics exist that are not favored by natural selection. Oftentimes, sexual selection opposes natural selection in that it selects for traits not favored by natural selection. And again, it's because it's selecting for traits that assist with reproduction. So if a trait has or provides an advantage over a rival in securing a mate, then it is subject to sexual selection. And that is what often will lead to these kind of maladaptive developments of male traits, the generation of ornate traits, ornamentation, different kind of sexually based weapons. They should not be, or they are not favored by natural selection, but they exist and persist because they are favored by sexual selection. So one of these kind of traits or aspects that arise from sexual selection is the concept of sexual dimorphism, which is where males and females of the same species bear distinct differences in appearance or in size. They are distinctly different from one another, other than just differences in sex organs. Now, these distinctions can include physiological differences like size, color, or body structure between the sexes, right? You look at the superb bird of paradise. They're well noted for the males having this elaborate plumage and really complex mating dances. But the females, here's the female. This is the male in the background. This is the female. They're far less ornate. So that's a distinct difference between the male and the females within that species. A lot of times you'll see pronounced size differences between the sexes. So for example, male sea lions will weigh roughly 3 times the amount as females. Baboons, the males will typically be more than twice as large as females. With your plumage, again, you see that those coloration differences a lot in your bird species. So here's the mandarin duck. This is the male who has this beautiful, highly ornate plumage, and then over here is the female, which literally looks like a black and white version of the male. Going back to size, in most cases when you have those differences in size existing between males and females, it's the male that's kind of the larger of the two. But there are numerous species where that is not the case. It's actually the female that's the larger of the sexes. And when there's kind of that difference, it's referred to as reverse sexual dimorphism. Right? So you see that with tree frogs, where it's the female who's the larger of the two. The female is actually almost twice the size of the male. You see this with black widow spiders, where the female is significantly larger than the male and is also very different in body kind of body shape in regards to the abdomen, as well as coloration and different kind of color characteristics in reference to the hourglass shape. A lot of times when you see the female being the larger of the size, that's usually the same cases where the female will later eat the male. So I don't think it happens a lot with your frog species, but it does with the insects. So example with the black widow, right? The female will eat the male, which is why she's called the widow. Praying mantis species, you see the same thing. The female will eat the male, and she does that in order to gain energy from his chitin exoskeleton, so that she's able to have enough energy to fertilize and lay the million of eggs that she's about to produce. So you have these physiological differences that I just kind of harped on, but there's also behavioral differences. So a really cool example that I love, the mountain spiny lizard. They're sexually dimorphic in regards to feeding habitats, or feeding habits, I should say. The males and females are equally sized, but they differ based on what prey species they seek. So they actually seek out different sizes of prey. So there's physiological differences, but there's also behavioral differences. Now there's two quote unquote types of sexual selection. That you have intersexual selection and intrasexual selection. Intersexual selection is sexual selection that is occurring between two sexes. So it's mating success that's determined by between sex interactions. So, for example, female choice of mates. You can kind of, for example, use the male peacock, right? They have these giant, brightly colored tails, but by doing so, it makes them kind of easy prey for predators, right? According to natural selection or common thought, it should decrease their fitness. So kind of what's the advantage to having that trait? Well, females will choose the male peacocks that have the brightest colored tails, or the largest tail plumage, even though that's risky for the male. But they will choose those males because the chances of having those traits passed on to their offspring is increased. Those traits mean that male, despite having those disadvantages as far as being easy prey, has been able to survive this long. So that must be a healthy male, that's a strong male, survives well, so that's a good mate to invest in. That mate has good genes that are likely going to be passed on to offspring. And if the offspring are able to get those genes, then the offspring as well are likely to have increased reproductive success once they reach maturity. So that's kind of the notion behind kind of that intersexual selection. Again, somehow one or the other is choosing the other based on good body condition, the assumption of good genes, etc. Intrasexual selection, this is sexual selection that occurs within a sex. So mating success is determined by within sex interactions. So this would be the conflict or competitions between males of a species vying for the same female. Now, when we talk about intersexual selection, right? A lot of times we're talking about a choosy female, and when you think about it, being choosy seems kind of silly, right? Because If you're choosy, that requires time. There's energy involved. There's risk that no mating is going to occur at all. So why be choosy with mates? Well, the basic rationale is that random mating is stupid mating. It pays to be choosy because in the sexually reproducing species, the genetic quality of your mate is going to determine half the genetic quality of your offspring. So if your mate has significantly wonderful genetic quality, then that's going to be passed on to your offspring. And that will come in handy for your offspring, or kind of ensures that your offspring will have high reproductive success once they reach sexual age. So that's why females are choosy. The reason why they're actually able to be choosy in the environment is kind of rooted in the operational sex ratio. So that's the ratio of sexually available females versus males. In a lot of your kind of natural communities, they are largely male-based. You have a significantly greater amount of males versus females that are ready to mate. So your females that are sexually mature are in short supply, which means that males are going to compete intensely for access to those females. But because there are so many males available, they are so prevalent in the population, females have the opportunity to be more choosy with who they mate. They have a greater selection of mates. So the reason why females are choosy, there's kind of two benefits to it. One is good resources. So usually the most competitive males, or the males who win these competitions, they oftentimes will secure the best territories. So by having these great territories, or by having the best territory, that kind of secures a better home range for the female, better nesting sites, less predation, etc. So she gains better resources by having a better mate. There's also the notion of good genes. So the highly favored characteristics of males will be inherited in the female's offspring. So if he has really good body size, or has elaborate competitive characteristics per se, or well-defined characteristics that are selected for, those will be inherited in the offspring, and those likely will enable those offspring to reproduce later in the future. So it's the aspect of good genes is the female saying, okay, what male has great genes that can be given to my offspring to ensure that my offspring will survive and reproduce in the future. So this goes back to your intra-sexual selection, with the kind of male against male conflict, in an effort to compete for access to a female. And in this kind of competition, female choice, quote unquote choice, is not linked. Again, the female is not choosing the better of the two males. Rather, the competition is determining which male will have access to that female. So species who have these kind of competitions, or engage in these kind of selective mediums, oftentimes will have sexually selected weapons. Sexually selected weapons are traits or structures that can be used to combat other competitive males that are vying for the same female. They can also be used for kind of maintaining territories, keeping out predators, etc. So they can also be used as defense in that aspect. But the species that possess these weapons, there's an incredible amount of cost that goes into it, right? There's a high degree of energetic cost, right? It takes a lot of energy to create these traits, a lot of nutrition involved to support them and create them. But the actual cost of investing in these weapons is outweighed and offset by the fact that they're going to get the benefit of increased reproductive opportunities. So that benefit, by having increased reproductive opportunities, that outweighs the cost of actually creating or maintaining these structures. And the structures themselves are, in a way, honest indicators of male quality. Usually it's the larger males or the healthier males that have the largest or more complex weapons because they're able to invest more energy into those structures. Smaller individuals will have disproportionately reduced traits, right? Trying to develop a large weapon in smaller males is far too great of an energetic investment for them to actually maintain and survive. So again, those traits can serve as an indication or signal of quality for the male, kind of the physical quality of body size, body condition, actual health, the kind of how much nutrients that male is able to obtain, and the fact that he's able to obtain enough nutrients must mean he has good access to good territories or is able to defend off predators, etc. So it by having these larger, bigger weapons, it means that you have a better male, in a sense. Now, as far as the evolution of these weapons, current evidence suggests that these weapons initially evolved through the course of natural selection. If you look at kind of ancestral weapons and look at the evolution of these weapons over time, they initially were small, dangerous traits that allowed for protection and defense. And then later they evolved into these kind of larger characteristics, larger traits to serve more as, again, signals or degrees of quality. So you had the kind of these existing features co-opt for a new function, which you see a lot happen in evolution. So again, these weapons initially evolved through natural selection, but then the elaboration of male weapons kind of increased or was advanced by sexual selection. Now, weapon size in populations is extremely variable. Great example is your Hercules beetle. Oftentimes, those weapons are the most variable morphological traits within the population. And with your Hercules beetle, this is a species of rhinoceros beetle that's native to the rainforests of Central and South America. It has these, or I should say, it's sexual selected weapon are these two giant horns that extend, one off the thorax and the other off the head, that are used during male to male combat when they're vying for female. And the actual size of those horns, as you can see from this figure here, they vary significantly between individuals of that same or that single population. These appendages, those two horns, the one extending from the thorax is usually larger than or slightly longer than the one extending from the head or the cephalic horn. But those together, those appendages mimic kind of the appearance and function of a large claw. And they'll actually use their horns like a claw. They employ a kind of a pinching motion to squeeze and lift their competitors. So when males are vying for these copulatory rights to a single female, they'll engage in complex battles. And they'll use their horns to clasp and subdue their opponent. And if they're able to successfully do that, they're able to successfully clasp the opponent between their horns, they will lift the opponent as far as they're able to, and then basically body slam the opponent on the ground. And that combat will go back and forth through multiple body slams before one male finally retreats. And when that male retreats, that the one that's retreating is the loser. So he's lost his chance. Figaro, stop. He's lost his chance at reproductive success. He has lost access to that female. The one who wins the battle gains access to the female. So kind of going more into these sexually selected weapons, I just find them very fascinating, mostly because of the amount of energy that's required to sustain these traits, and how prevalent they are across so many different taxa. There was a study done looking at how growth was actually increased, or the mechanism of growth in these structures, both your sexually selected weapons as well as sexually selected ornamentations, kind of like the long tails on your South African magpie species. The proposed mechanism is that there's increased cellular sensitivity to signaling, or to signals for growth and production, via the insulin-like growth factor pathway, so the insulin/IGF pathway. And I think that is what's responsible for these extreme growth periods, or the actual significant growth that is seen in these structures. A lot of the sexually selected weapons are more sensitive to nutrition load and more responsive to activation of your insulin IGF pathway, much more so than any other body structures. This was documented in the rhinoceros beetle horns, so the body slamming dude that we were just talking about. So kind of by having enhanced sensitivity to signals, and you're able to increase the activation and signaling of that pathway, which can increase, or can be correlated to the increase or extreme growth of these structures. So it's yes, there's a huge amount of energy invested, but it's also seems to be this notion of increased sensitivity to nutritional pathways that allow them to significantly or exponentially augment their growth. Alrighty, so this one actually kind of ties into natural selection. You sometimes see it with natural the forms of natural selection. Balancing selection refers to a number of selective processes by which multiple alleles, an allele is an alternate version of a gene, are actively maintained in the gene pool of a population at frequencies that are larger than you'd expect, particularly from processes like genetic drift alone. So it maintains, again, multiple phenotypes per se, and it maintains them all at equilibrium, and by doing so, it functions to conserve genetic polymorphisms. It helps to preserve or maintain genetic diversity within a population's gene pool. This is what accounts for the rich diversity of shell patterns in grove snail species. The major mechanisms for preserving polymorphisms, there's two of them that they include heterozygote advantage and frequency-dependent selection. Heterozygote advantage refers to some sort of advantage that is carried by the carriers of some sort of disease or genetic condition. A prime example being sickle cell anemia. So here the carriers have a higher survival rate, which allows the gene to be maintained in the gene pool, so that maintains that polymorph. The carriers for sickle cell anemia, they carry the sickle cell trait, which means there's the potential for their hemoglobin to become sickled, but they are able to maintain relatively normal, satisfactory lifestyles. Sickle cell anemia is this genetic disorder that involves the reduced ability of red blood cells to carry oxygen. It's caused by a mutation in the gene producing the hemoglobin protein, more specifically a mutation at the position of the 6th amino acid. And the mutation causes glutamic acid, which is the normal amino acid at that position, to be substituted with valine, which has a completely different chemical structure and therefore completely changes the chemical folding and tertiary structure of the hemoglobin protein to give it this sickle-celled shape that's very sticky. It'll stick to other red blood cells. It can puncture through blood vessels, which is when you get your sickle cell crises. So the heterozygote, or the carriers of sickle cell, there is some potential that they will have quote unquote sickle cell attacks, where there are instances where they do have some sickle cells present, but they don't have actual sickle cell anemia, which means not all of their red blood cells are sickled or abnormal. This is considered a heterozygote advantage because of its connection to malaria. there's been a lot of evidence that shows carriers of the sickle cell allele are less susceptible to malaria, and it has to do with the mutation of some of these red blood cells into a sickled form. And there's a lot of overlap between areas that are prevalent in malaria or have a high prevalence of malaria cases versus the frequency of your sickle cell allele. And again, the heterozygote advantage here is referring to carriers of the sickle cell allele having a higher survival rate in regards to both sickle cell anemia and malaria. So that heterozygosity offers protection from malaria, which makes being heterozygote advantageous and what allows it to maintain or to stay in the gene pool. Frequency-dependent selection. This is when you have multiple alleles occurring in a population or present within a population, those phenotypes present, and they're all relatively maintained at equilibrium. But the reason for such is that the direction of selection fluctuates. So first, selection will favor one allele, and then it favors the other. So that's frequency-dependent selection. The fitness of an allele depends on its frequency or its frequency of occurrence and presence within a population. Example would be scale-eating fish. So scale-eating fish are these annoying little fish species that prey on larger fish by actually eating their scales, hence the name, scale-eating fish. But their mouth is shifted to one aspect of their cranial region. They're either right-mouthed or left-mouthed. Right-mouthed means their mouth is actually kind of shifted over to the right side of their face. Left-mouthed is the opposite. And this stems from one gene. So one gene, two alleles. The dominant allele is right-mouthed. So to have left-mouthed means you need to be homozygous recessive. Prey species will actually guard themselves against attack based on whatever phenotype of the scale-eating fish is most common in the lake. So because of that guarding behavior based on the most common or most prevalent phenotype, it actually fluctuates the prevalence of the different phenotypes or the different alleles within that population. So if the population has, or if there's heavy predation based on the population or the phenotype left-mouthed fish. So if there's a high percentage of left-mouthed fish in the population, you'll have more prey species that start guarding against attack from the left side. And slowly you'll have a shift in allele frequency where you have a decrease in the kind of survivability and therefore the prevalence of left-mouthed and a shift to right-mouthed. So it's almost like directional selection, but it's more that you have maintenance and persistence of different phenotypes kind of at this threshold level or kind of held at equilibrium within a population because of kind of changes in selection, fluctuations in selection. All right, so that is all I have for this lecture. Again, if you have any comments, just leave them in the comments section below. Anything to add, that's always nice. I hope this lecture proved beneficial and that you walked away learning something that you didn't know before.